Bethesda was once a loved company that set trends in the entire gaming industry, with freedom of choice for the players, immersive settings, and huge open worlds. But now, their reputation is at free fall, and they became known for releasing half-finished games, lying about their features,
16 times the detail,
and trying everything to loot their players harder than you can in their own games. So naturally, you'd ask yourself, where did they take the wrong turn? And if we track this back to the beginning, it goes all the way back to 2006. This year, they released a horse armor players could buy for $2.50, which started the beginning of the end for them. But how can a horse armor for $2.50 take down a gaming giant like Bethesda? To understand this, we need to go back to the beginning. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Bethesda was the company that stood for innovation and quality, and they became known for bending the reality of what was believed to be possible in gaming. Quickly, other publishers tried to copy them, and they played a huge role in defining open world and roleplay games as we know them today. One of the first games they published that really pushed the boundaries of gaming was the game Daggerfall, which they released in 1969. This game broke countless world records due to the sheer size of the map. Just to put it in perspective, the map of this game is as big as Great Britain, with 15,000 towns and 750,000 NPCs. Even for today's standards, this is impressive. But there is one problem. No one needs a game world that is this big. Just to show you how big it really is, there are videos on YouTube showing that it takes literal days to walk from one end of the map to the other. But if this game stands for one thing, then it is that they are giving insane amounts of content to the player. And Bethesda went out of their way to show their players what they are capable of. However, the problem remained. Huge parts of the world were empty, and you could walk quite a while without encountering something interesting. It's like buying a giant box with nothing in it. You've been excited for a moment or two, but then you realize that you don't need a big empty box. However, for its time, this was critique at a very high level. And unlike today, they learned from their mistakes, and they started working on a game called The Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind. But back then, Bethesda had one big problem. While Morrowind was being developed, Bethesda was dying, and they almost went out of business because they spread themselves too thin on game releases that would fail. And if there's one thing for sure in gaming development, especially at that time, then it is that it's expensive to make those games and almost always a gamble if you would make your money back. Bethesda was in a back against the wall situation, and they knew they had to deliver. So they went all in on the game, and when it released, it was an instant hit, and fans absolutely loved Morrowind.
Shut up and take my money!
No longer running through the whole map, no more emptiness, and no more endless useless content. This time, the map had the perfect size, quests were actually fun, and there was always something to explore. Like the wizard that accidentally fell from the sky, and he became a meme in the community. People were in love with the game, and the two DLCs, Tribunal and Blood Moon, just made the whole game even more loved by the fans. At this point, Bethesda was at the top, and people couldn't wait for the next releases. With just one release, Bethesda turned from the company that was about to go bankrupt to everybody's favorite. Now you might be wondering, why am I telling you all of this? Well, this is just to show you how much love they put into their games. They put the players and their needs first.
Snow. We need more snow. Can't have enough snow.
Indeed.
But most importantly, players actually got a really good bang for their buck and not just get ripped off. I mean, you could dump hundreds of hours into the game for about $50 for the main game and like $30 for the DLCs. And even more importantly, it shows how DLCs worked back then. Because back in the days, DLCs were almost like a new game with 10 or 20 hours playtime. But today, DLCs are mostly ugly skins or pay-to-win mechanics, where Bethesda plays a huge role in bringing this to the gaming industry. And after Morrowind, it got silent for a while. But after 4 long years of waiting, fans finally got the newest Elder Scrolls title in 2006, Oblivion. However, without anyone knowing, this was when the downfall of Bethesda slowly began. This would be the beginning of the end. And over the next almost 20 years, they turned into the company that is less worried about their games than about the question on how they can cheese as much money out of their fans. But at first, it didn't look like it. When Oblivion first released, it seemed like another smash hit for Bethesda. 1.7 million copies sold in the first week. Fastest selling Xbox 360 title of all time, and even today, many people believe that it's one of the best RPGs ever released. I mean, if you look through the reviews of the game, they are outstanding. And the hype grew even bigger. It goes this far that people even describe Bethesda as the best gaming development studio of all time. Life was good for Bethesda. But wait, how could the downfall of a game studio begin when they just released a game that was record-breaking? Well, it's because greed started to rise. And they tried everything to get the game in as many hands as possible, and then get those players to spend as much money as possible. The first step was to sell the game to as many people as possible. So they started lying to the fans in the promo phase, especially one person, Todd Howard. In 2005, he told everyone that Oblivion's NPC AI was that good that there would be random, non-scripted dialogues.
Let's take a look at the other side of the game, our new rating AI system. These NPCs are not scripted.
May you rest in peace.
In reality, the NPCs were not quite as intelligent as Howard has framed them, and players made fun of Bethesda for that. But this wouldn't be the last lie Todd would tell about his games. And even worse, that's not even the main thing players were mad about. Which brings us to step 2 of their plan. Make as much money from these players as possible. See, Oblivion became the game where corporate greed started to take over, and managers started to think about how they could further monetize this success. And so it happened. They released the infamous Horse Armor DLC. Players could buy an armor for their horse for $2.50. That did nothing at all but to make your horse look different. With this, they became the first ever company that would release microtransactions like this in a game. And nobody realized it at that time. But Bethesda started the butterfly effect, and the consequences not only ruined Bethesda, but also changed the entire gaming industry forever, which we are going to uncover later. In the days after the release, Bethesda got mocked for this move. People couldn't believe that there were players so stupid to actually buy an armor that does nothing. But even more importantly, people were pissed. The amount of Reddit posts about the Horse Armor DLC is insane, and there are even more memes about it. Angry players online vote that they would not buy this. But according to reports online, just the Horse Armor DLC made Bethesda somewhere between $5 and $15 million in total sales.
I don't touch the stuff, not gonna touch the stuff, never touch the stuff. That was a lie.
What's even more crazy about this is that you have to keep in mind that this was pure profit. Because coding a horse armor like this can probably be done by an intern. Bethesda ignored all of the hate and criticism surrounding this, probably because they were busy counting all of the money they made. And over the next few months, Bethesda would go on and release more and more microtransactions for Oblivion.
Hello, I like money.
Unfortunately, Bethesda struck gold with that. And from that point on, more and more companies started offering the same thing. And it became so bad that there is almost no game that is being released today anymore that doesn't have any microtransactions in them. And it became the new norm. At this point, Bethesda would start to change. A change that would slowly but surely change the entire way on how they approach games. Instead of focusing on quality, they started releasing half-finished, buggy games. However, there was always one thing that was guaranteed to work at this point: the store for microtransactions. Like in Fallout 76, when it was released, there were bugs everywhere. But at least the Atomic Shop was working, but we're going to talk about that later. Now, when Skyrim and Fallout 3 released, they were again instant hits for Bethesda. And at the beginning, they left out all of the in-game purchases. At least for now. To me it seems that at this point, they were still scared to lose a substantial amount of players if they milked them too much. But what stayed were the lies by Todd about the games. For example, for Fallout 3, he said,
As of last week, we're over 200 endings. That is not an exaggeration.
In reality, they only had 3 endings. Or, when it comes to Skyrim, Todd has claimed that each village would have their own economy and production lines. But if you go ahead and Google this, you will see that players actually tried this by burning down buildings. And it didn't work. Now let's take a step back for a moment. Besides those lies and false expectations to sell more games, Skyrim and Fallout 3 were actually great games. And many people still love and play them today, more than 10 years after their release. But it seems like the fear of pissing off their fanbase had gone away in 2015 with the release of Fallout 4. Because this is the first time fans have seen that the greed really started to affect the games negatively. And you could see in real time how their priorities shifted. Initially, it was planned as a marketing tool to hype people up for the release of Fallout 4. But it quickly turned into a cash grab for Bethesda.
It does contain pot of greed!
The gameplay is not really special and has countless bugs, which the developers never really bothered to fix, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But what immediately jumps into your face are the same dark patterns like in games like Clash of Clans, Monopoly Go, or Diablo Immortal. For example, the ability to pay with their in-game currency to skip waiting, or the daily rewards you get, so they basically force you to come back every single day. But the worst thing is that they introduced the lunch boxes, which are basically loot boxes like in Overwatch. So instead of paying for an item you want, you pay for the chance to get an item you want. This way, they give you your rush in only very small doses, and you want to come back for more. Just like these lab rats in the experiments on dopamine. What's even more sad about this whole situation? That this is by far not the greediest move by Bethesda, which we are going to find out really soon. As you can imagine, people were mad. But because of the fact that mobile games just seem to work this way and everybody accepts this, and their core audience doesn't really care about mobile games, it didn't cause a major backlash. But it still left a sour taste. However, it wasn't just Fallout Shelter that rubbed fans the wrong way. It was also Fallout 4. Don't get me wrong, if we compare this to today's games, it was still very, very good. But it didn't feel the same anymore. It was not the banger everyone expected from a Bethesda game. And just to give you a rough overview, dialogue options sucked hard, the characters were boring to the point where I can't even remember one of them, and the combat system was extremely outdated. And honestly, this was everything that made Bethesda games great. The option for you to completely immerse into a world where you feel like a part of it. But hey, on the bright side, they promised the players that the game will not have any microtransactions. Which was another lie, as we'll find out soon.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
But first, we need to take a look at what happened to Skyrim in 2015. Because this just makes the move they made 2 years later with Fallout 4 even worse for the fans. See, after the game released in 2011, it was another huge success for Bethesda. It broke tons of records, and despite its flaws, people still love and play it today. One of the biggest factors for the longevity of the game is the huge modding community. A lot of these mods that were self-coded by the players fixed bugs or inconvenient stuff that Bethesda never bothered to fix themselves. Others even added whole new storylines to the game, and then there are some that are just hilarious, like the This is Sparta mod, the Bear Musician, or Super Skyrim Bros. However, in 2015, Bethesda and Steam decided to put those mods behind a paywall. Bethesda knew that people would not like this. They knew they had to find some kind of explanation. So they released a statement saying that they want to find a good way to compensate all those hard-working modders for the effort to making the game better. However, it's clear they were just trying to make more money from the game. What happened next was the biggest wave of hate they ever got, and this from all sides. The players were unhappy that they had to pay for mods, which they were able to get for free before. Others were unhappy because this killed the entire open source spirit for mods. And modders were unhappy because of the meager pay. See, the split for these games worked like this. Steam would get 40%, which apparently is their standard percentage. Modders would get 25%, and Bethesda would take home 45% for owning the game and the rights to it. However, it didn't take long until the backlash got too big, and just 4 days after the release, Steam decided to shut the whole thing down because of the overwhelmingly negative reaction by fans. And it seems that Bethesda at this point still cared about their reputation, so they released a statement. In there, they would later try to represent it as their own idea to take down the paid mods again and released a bunch of statements, which the community didn't believe.
Hello, I'm
Todd Howard,
President and CEO of
Bethesda.
And to all those affected, I want to say, we are deeply sorry. We're sorry. I'm deeply sorry.
So usually you'd think that Bethesda learned from the mistake and expect that they would take a step back from trying to monetize mods, which they didn't even create on their own. And that's also what Todd Howard promised when the game released. And he also said it again in 2015 after the whole Skyrim mod incident. And despite the fact that he was caught lying several times, fans still desperately wanted to believe him, even though it came from the same guy that said this about Fallout 76.
And it's our biggest one yet. It is 4 times the size of Fallout 4. And this time it features all new rendering, lighting, and landscape technology. It allows us to have 16 times the detail and even view distant weather systems across the map. I read on the internet that our games have had a few bugs. All of this just works. I'm not kidding.
So you probably sat in your offices thinking, just because introducing paid mods didn't work with Skyrim, it doesn't mean that it just won't work with Fallout 4, right? Well, fast forward to 2017, they released the Creation Club, which would later on become their central hub for in-game purchases. And in the Creation Club, the lies and greed came together, because in there they started selling Fallout 4 microtransactions. From this point on, you could buy cool paint jobs for your Pip-Boy, furniture for your workshop, and ironically enough, they even released a horse power armor you could buy for $2.15. It was at this point where it really felt like Bethesda turned from the company everyone loved to the villain. But of course, when they released paid mods for Fallout 4, they tried to frame it as a benefit for the players, because this way they knew everything they downloaded would be safe, and the modders would get paid for their high-quality work. To my surprise, this whole Creation Club wasn't as badly perceived as I expected it to be, and it was nowhere near the Skyrim scandal. And to me, it seems that fans at this point just accepted the fact that Bethesda would do anything to increase the money they make. And because there was no huge backlash, Bethesda probably saw this as an invitation to heavily monetize every other game they had. And it didn't just stay with Fallout 4. So, in 2023, they reintroduced paid mods to Skyrim. Looking through Reddit, you could see that countless players were asking why they put the paid mods for Skyrim back in. And one user pointed out perfectly. He wrote, "The purpose of paid mods is to generate revenue for Bethesda. There isn't another answer." And despite Bethesda claiming that this time modders would be getting paid fairly for their work, the split looks quite similar. It's estimated that Bethesda takes about 70% of the profit, while the modders that do the hard work of creating the mod get 30%, which compared to before is only 5% more. But for the price Bethesda is offering the mods as, it really doesn't make a big difference. The sad thing is that everything about the Creation Club just screams one thing: drain the wallets of the players. And looking at the in-game store of Fallout 4, the manipulation tactics just jump in your face. I'm not going to list out all of them, but one example would be that they don't tell you the real dollar price of the items, but they introduce their own currency, the credit system. Now, complete transparency. There are games that are using even worse manipulation tactics to get you to spend your hard-earned money, like Diablo Immortal. But just because everyone is using it and there are worse examples, I don't think that this should justify using those manipulation tactics at all. And at this point, the corporate greed really started to affect the games negatively. And I'm not talking about slightly affecting the games negatively, like with Fallout 4, where the game was still enjoyable for a lot of people, or in Skyrim, where there are just a few things that turn the players off. I'm really talking about releasing half-finished games. And the best example for that is Fallout 76. In June 2018, Bethesda announced a new Fallout game. After 3 years of waiting, people were hungry for a new Bethesda game. And at E3, Todd Howard promised everyone an MMO Fallout game, where you don't even notice that you will be playing on a server. A game with 16 times the detail.
16 times the detail.
A game that players will just love. After this announcement, players were extremely hyped. Once again. See, at this point, the only thing that annoyed players were the greedy manipulation tactics. But Bethesda didn't fail one of their launches before. Therefore, people were still used to a good quality Bethesda game. However, when the game went live, this changed. Once people got the game in their hands, they had to download a day one patch of 45 gigabytes. And when they finally started the game, it was full of bugs. Servers crashed constantly, textures weren't loading, broken animations, floating objects, and all-consuming void. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Here is a whole list of the bugs that were reported on launch. But if you want to see all of them yourself, there is a 3-hour-long video on YouTube with all the bugs just one player found personally. The only thing that seemed to be working in this game was the Atomic Shop, which is the in-game shop you can spend your real money in. Showing once more that Bethesda fell for the corporate greed. Because instead of pushing the release date of the game back to give the developers more time to actually make a great game, like Rockstar did with Red Dead Redemption 2, the developers were pushed to release the game urgently. Probably so Bethesda could use the Christmas shopping time to sell more games.
What? No! What'd you do?
And they really went all out when it came to making as much money as possible out of the game. And this time, it didn't just stay with microtransactions in the games. They pulled every trick out of their sleeve to get people to spend their hard-earned cash. So when they first announced the game on E3, they also offered the Power Armor Special Edition for just $200. In there, they offered a wearable helmet, a glow-in-the-dark map, character toys, and a duffel bag. But what players received was completely different, especially the duffel bag. See, the quality of the duffel bag was awful. The material was cheap, and it was a completely different material than advertised altogether. As you can imagine, people were extremely outraged. They felt ripped off, and they felt betrayed. In the following days, social media was full with posts hating on Bethesda. But when asked, Bethesda just said, "Hello, we are sorry you're not happy with the bag. The bag shown in the media was a prototype and was too expensive to make. We aren't planning on doing anything about it." Yes, of course, it's totally okay to give people something completely different than what they ordered. I mean, it's totally the same if I order a $6,000 Golden Boy burger and then I get a $1 hamburger from McDonald's. No, but for real, this statement made fans even more mad. So, Bethesda's PR team released a new statement, trying to save themselves from the hate. In this new statement, they claimed that the material was just unavailable and that's why they switched to another one. So, not only did Bethesda release an unfinished mess of a game for $60, but they also released a collector's edition for $200 that completely scammed the fans. Bethesda knew that they had to do something about it to apologize to their fans. So, they made a huge announcement that they are working on a compensation for this whole mess. So people waited patiently for it. And then Bethesda came out with the compensation. However, this made everything even more worse. Players received 500 atoms for the atomic shop, which equals to be about $5. Ironically, this wasn't even enough to purchase the in-game canvas duffel bag, which was 700 atoms. As you can imagine, this was not a very good compensation, and instead of calming the players down, this made them even more mad. At one point, the pressure got so huge on Bethesda that 6 months later, they had to send everyone the real advertised version of the bag. And the sad thing is that this didn't just happen once, it happened twice with the Nuka Dog Run. In there, they would advertise a bottle of Nuka rum for $8. In reality, it was just a bottle of regular rum with a plastic shell of Nuka Cola around it. This time, their apology was, they told everyone that they worked really hard on it and that they believe it's a great product. However, it probably went like this. In the production of the whole thing, Bethesda realized that making their own bottles would be too expensive. On the other side, no one would buy it if they advertise it as plastic shell. So during the marketing of the special edition, they really tried everything to be as vague as possible and make the players believe that it was a glass bottle. But it wasn't just the purchases of the special editions that were mad. It were also the players that purchased the normal game. And a lot of them wanted their money back. Bethesda was flooded with requests for their money back. However, the response from them, customers who have downloaded the game are not eligible for a refund. And at that point, the transformation of Bethesda couldn't be stopped anymore. They threw everything they were once known for, which is making really good games and over-delivering to the players, out of the window, just for the sake of profit. This greed made them go this far to mislead even their most loyal fans that purchased a $200 special edition. Players were even forced to the point where they had to start a lawsuit because they effectively got scammed by Bethesda. And just to put that back into perspective, this whole greed by Bethesda started when they sold a $2.50 horse armor back in 2006. Because there they realized they could make more money selling useless stuff to gamers than by actually making a great game. And in my opinion, they did this in the most deceptive way as possible. But after this extremely failed launch, you would expect that Bethesda would do everything to regain the trust of their fans, right? They would go back to their roots, fix all of the mistakes in the game, stop aggressively monetizing it, and after that's done, go and work on another great game, right? Well, this wasn't the case.
For the first time in my life, I feel like I've stolen enough.
Bender, snap out of it!
Sorry, I don't know what came over me. Let's go! I love stealing. I love taking things.
Instead of battering, Bethesda tried to squeeze even more money out of the few players that were left in the game. So around the holiday season in the same year, they added the Common to Town bundle to the Atomic Shop, which, by the way, was still one of the few things that were working in the game. Anyways, in the bundle was a Santa and Mrs. Claus skin, a Christmas camp decoration, and 2 icons. Guess how much they charged for that? Well, they offered it for 2,000 atoms. So in real money, that would be $20. What makes this even worse, that this is the sale price. They claimed that regularly, they would sell it for $30, which is half the price for the full game. And you get 2 skins, some crappy decoration, and 2 icons.
Here comes the money!
Here we go.
Money talk.
Here comes the money!
So just to put that into perspective for you again, just a couple of years ago, you could get a full-blown extension at the same price. And this extension added sometimes more than 20 hours of gameplay to the game. I don't know about you, but to me, it feels like they realized they messed up with the game, reduced development to a minimum, and tried to make some cash from those that still play it, regardless of the bugs. The worst thing about all of this, people still trust them, and they keep buying stuff from them, and Bethesda knows this. So they pulled off the same trick again with Starfield in 2023. Just a little bit different. But before we get into Starfield, when making this video, I constantly had the question in mind, why would they do this? I mean, they would be completely delusional if they didn't know that they just keep pissing off their fans. And in the very long run, this might even lose them all of their loyal players. So I started digging deeper, because the answer, they just do this for the money, or because they're greedy, just wasn't good enough for me. Now, unlike other companies like EA, they are not a public company. So they don't have the pressure from shareholders to generate as much profit as possible. In fact, Bethesda is owned by just a couple of people that have a very high share in the company. And I'm not going to try and make this too complicated. If you want to get into more detail on that, there's a very good video by Luke Steffens. But in simple words, in 2007, a company approached the mother company of Bethesda and invested $300 million into them. At the time, Bethesda was using the money to pump out really good games, like the Fallout games or Skyrim. But in 2016, just 2 years before the launch of Fallout 76, the company that invested in Bethesda was showing huge interest in buying the whole company. So instead of doubling down on what Bethesda did best, releasing good games, they took a different route. A route that would be way more profitable for them, but come at the cost of the players. So the easiest way for them was to aggressively monetize their already existing games. And they already laid the groundwork for this monetization with things like the Horse Armor, Fallout Shelter, and the first paid mod for Skyrim. And just by coincidence, a year later, they realized the Creation Club for Fallout 4, which we have already talked about. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would they still be willing to buy Bethesda after this? And the answer is simple. The more revenue and the more profit the company makes, the more money they can justify when the new company wants to take over. However, one thing I'm unsure of, they already have shown huge interest in buying Bethesda back in 2016. But since then, there hasn't been an update if the deal will ever be made. And even more importantly, ever since Bethesda started monetizing even dogs in Fallout just with the vision to sell it out at one point, they managed to have constant PR disasters, class action lawsuits that have been going on ever since the release of Fallout 76, and basically completely ruining the company's reputation. So from my perspective, it's questionable if someone still wants to buy a company that is in a state like this. And the sad thing about this, we have seen the process over and over again in the gaming industry. There's a stable, good working company with happy employees, happy customers, and great games. Then a big investor comes and it all crashes down. And the company is left with unhappy customers, unhappy employees, and bad games. And one of the biggest examples would be when Activision bought Blizzard. But in the situation of Bethesda, just the potential of a big investor coming in completely ruined them. However, fans still had big hopes that Bethesda, the company they once loved, can still make great games, and was not just after their money. So when Bethesda announced Starfield, people were hyped. And in typical Bethesda style, they promoted the game as hard as they could. Regarding to Bethesda, the game was in production for 8 years. You could explore countless of unique planets. Characters should be memorable. And sky should be the limit. And they meant this literally.
And you may be wondering, just how big is this game? So we thought we'd take one last moment and show you.
Bethesda really tried to sell this as their biggest game yet. The best game they have ever made. And when I watched the marketing campaign, for some reason, it reminded me of the entire thing of No Man's Sky. With difference that Todd Howard has actually experience, and Sean Murray didn't handle it very well.
No, it's not.
Before the game even got released, every rating platform gave the game insanely high reviews. And it even got the award by Steam for the most innovative gameplay. So fans believed that this had to be an amazing game. And their hope was big, that the gaming company they once loved was now back. And that the whole Fallout 76 thing was just a mistake. And here's the thing. Bethesda apparently learned from their mistake. But unfortunately, not in the way you'd think. Remember how I told you about the countless times Todd was caught lying?
We always start with the world, and this time it features all new rendering, lighting, and landscape technology. where you could explore with complete freedom in the galaxy. 16 times the detail. These NPCs are not scripted.
As of last week, we're over 200 endings. That is not an exaggeration.
Well, this is the thing they have improved, not the actual gameplay. Because everything they have addressed was in the game, in one way or another. See, during the hype of the game, they were extremely vague about the features in the game. For example, they said thousands of planets you could explore. While you could actually explore those planets, most of them were just extremely limited and completely empty. Technically, it was not a lie, but it set false expectations to the fans. But the release of Starfield really shows how bad Bethesda became at making games. Because while they might have learned to not lie when it comes to marketing, the game design and gameplay really hasn't improved since Skyrim. And even in Skyrim, no one even played it for its gameplay. And this outdatedness can definitely be seen in the combat system, which pretty much feels the same like in Fallout 4, which even at that time wasn't a very good combat system. And as a side note, to me, the characters were still boring, I can't remember even one of them, and I ran into several bugs when playing the game. But it seems that this is sadly now the new standard for Bethesda. See, Bethesda was once the company that set trends in the industry with games like Morrowind or Skyrim. And they have shown in the past that they were able to learn from their mistakes. For example, when they had a way too big map in Daggerfall and they downsized it in Morrowind to make it more action-packed. However, today, this is a whole other story. And instead of admitting their mistakes, they argue against it. For example, when a user made a long, detailed post constructively criticizing what he didn't like about Starfield and that the planets are mostly empty, a dev responded, "Some Starfield planets are meant to be empty by design, but that's not boring. When the astronauts first went to the moon, there was nothing there and they weren't bored." Honestly, there is so much wrong in this response, like that some planets are empty. Yes, sure, there are some planets that are empty. And the rest of the planets that are in the game that aren't empty are just the same 5 structures copied and pasted. Or when he's saying that the astronauts also landed on the moon and it was empty, it's just such a bad comparison. I mean, he's completely leaving out the fact that landing on the moon in real life is like 1,000 times more exciting than landing on the moon in a video game. But this example just shows that it seems like Bethesda is simply not able to learn from their mistakes anymore. So looking at this, fans already didn't receive this very mediocre game really well. And then in June 2024 it happened, what everybody saw coming, but everybody feared. Instead of trying to improve the game, they released the Creation Club for Starfield. Right from the start, they added mods in there that drastically improved the game. And that's what criticized fans the most. They already paid $60 for a AAA game, and then they need to pay extra money for mods to fix the mistakes from developers. But unfortunately, this seems to be the new standard playbook by Bethesda. They make outlandish claims about the game to get fans hyped up, then they release a buggy game before it's done. Next, they release a couple of patches to make the game somewhat playable, wait until the hate is over, and then start to heavily monetize it. And this cycle has repeated ever since the release of Fallout 4. So the only 2 questions that are now left for me when it comes to Bethesda is what will happen when they release The Elder Scrolls 6? And right now it's not looking too bright. Probably it's going to be a mess of a game and then they're going to try and fix it with some paid mods. And the second question is for how long will they be able to drain the wallets of their fans before they stop playing their games? And the craziest thing about this is, if you think about it, that it all started with a $2.50 horse armor that has shown Bethesda that they can really make money out of thin air, where they don't have to release a new game, but just release in-game cosmetics.